Hello and welcome to my channel. I'm MrTieDye, and today I was on the tie-dye pages and someone had a question about doing a cube so that they could make dice for their bunco team. So I decided today was a perfect day to jump on and make a live video. Since this is a live video, I can't post the results at the end, but I happen to have a cube tee that I've made, so the one we're making today is going to be similar to this one here. So let's go ahead and get started. So put that out of the way. Let's see if I can follow along with the chat here a little bit, if I can get that going. But what I have here is a t-shirt that's been soaked in soda ash. It's been spun out, and then I've centered it. So I folded just the front forward, because this is a design that's easier to do if you have just the front of a t-shirt here rather than a double layer. So, and I'll put a link to that after the video's upload and everything in the description of how to center a t-shirt. So anyways, I got just one layer of the front of the t-shirt here, and what I'm going to do is put a mark on here where I want the center to be. And the way I'm going to determine the center is I'm going to mark about 4 fingers width down from the top of the t-shirt. That's going to be the top of my design. And then this here is going to be the center of the design, and this will be down at the bottom of the design. So what I'm going to do to start with is put a angle on here, and you can either use a protractor or if you have an angle, but I want a 60-degree angle, because I'm going to fold this into thirds. So this one here has already got a 60-degree angle, but you could use a protractor and draw that same line. So I'm going to go right from the center of my design and draw that line up there, and I'm going to flip this over and draw the same line on the opposite side. These here are going to be my first 2 fold lines for the cube design. So basically I'm folding on this line here, so I'm going to take this edge and line it up right over here on this other line. And that other line is now in this crease here. And I'm going to fold this line over. Okay. Looks like we got a couple people on here already. So the main thing is just getting your folds lined up nice and even here so that you don't have extra wrinkles in there. So once I get that lined up and I can kind of feel that that's all flat, then the next thing I'm going to do, since I used my protractor, this here is 6 inches. I use this here to measure out how big I wanted my design. So what I'm going to do is lay that same 6 inches, but if you want it larger, if you want it, you know, this here is going to give me about a 12-inch cube. If you wanted it 14 or 16 inches, then you would just do 7 or 8 inches. I'm going to do 6 inches, which will give me the 12-inch cube. So I'm going to measure up from the point up on this side of the line, and I'm going to measure from the point up on this side. And now what I'm going to do is draw a line across those 2 points here. So that's going to be one of my fold lines. And then the other thing, that's going to give me the outside lines of my cube, but we also have these inside lines. Well, those are formed by dyeing this side right here. So you can, well, you can get a marker that works. You can put a line just to remind yourself that this here is the other line that you're going to dye along. So what I'm going to do to start with is I'm going to accordion fold across this line, and then I'm going to go down this side here. Let me make sure I'm centered there. So I usually just do little tiny accordion folds and try to line everything up right on top here. Okay, once I get to that point, now, if you guys have watched my peace sign video, I'm going to do that same type of fold where I'm going to line this line up and connect it in with this line. So I'm just going to kind of fold that around, and then I'm going to do the same accordion folds, putting this little blue line right on top. This here is the same way that I do the peace sign. Not all of the folds, but this last part of the fold. And that way all of my lines that I'm going to dye are all in one place here. And this just makes it easy to tie up. Okay, so now once I have that, I'm going to flip this around. And most of the time when it's wet like that, it will stay semi-folded. That gives me time to get this set up. So I'm just going to put a little slip knot in here just to make it easy to wrap that on there to start with. And if you want, you can use rubber bands, but basically I'm going to tie up that first one, and then I'm going to fold these back in there, wrap this under, and I'm going to tie that up too. So I'll usually wrap it around a few times right here just to hold that in place. And then I'm going to wrap it back around this center, the end part here again a few times, and then tie that off. Okay. Yes, it's easy for me, but that's because I've had 19 years of practice. So it takes a. So the rest of this here, you can kind of do whatever you want. You can fold this up and spiral that. You can scrunch it up, whatever you want. I'm going to lay this out a little bit flat, and I think I'm going to do a spiral on this cube. So basically, I just want to try to line all of these folds back up nice and flat. But like I say, this part here you can do however you like. And now I'm just going to spiral that. Yeah, this one is fairly simple. I mean, like a peace sign, but it does take some practice getting everything folded just how you want it. And like I say, trying to do it on just the front of the t-shirt is going to be the best because of the thickness. If you get too many layers in here, then getting the dye to penetrate all the way is more difficult. Hey, Josh. All right, so once we get this tied up, then we'll start getting some dye put on this. And I will have put my kite string video down in the description also, in case you need some tips on how to use the kite string. I think if you try the kite string, you're gonna like it. I really loved it since I started using it about 6-7 years ago. All right, there's my end. Yeah, I fell in love with tie-dye as soon as I started doing it 19 years ago, and I haven't stopped. So you're going to have a lot of fun as you get deeper into this and just explore with the different folds and how to get your dye saturation good. I mean, they're just different little points to practice on, but once you kind of bring them all together, then there's really very little that you can't do with tie-dye. So, okay, so now there is my design. Like I say, this here is the blue lines that are going to be on the inside. This here is going to be the outside of my cube. So I'm going to dye all of that with my thick black dye, and I'll put a thing down the bottom on how I do make the thick black dye. But I also just ordered some new sodium alginate, that's supposed to dissolve quicker. So probably within a couple days I'm going to be playing with that and see if I can come up with a new way of making the thick black dye. But for now, this here is going to work. So I usually will just give that a nice good coat across there, and then across these here. And then I usually like to take my cuticle pusher. This here is just something that I found in the nail department, the fingernail department, that pushes your cuticles up. Anyways, it's got a nice smooth edge on there, and that allows me to poke that dye further down into the t-shirt, because the thick black dye doesn't want to penetrate as far, but it also then doesn't spread much either. So that gives me a nice thick line, or thin line here. But sometimes you have to put a few coats on and push it in or let it soak in. And what I'll do with this edge here is pick that up and just apply the dye directly on top there and let that soak in. This is the edge that we folded up. And you can squeeze that a little bit just to help the dye soak in. The difference between the thick black dye and regular black dye is the thick black dye doesn't spread, so it's going to leave more of a thin line. If I used regular dye, then it would spread out further and you'd get a thicker line. So I'm going to coat the back side now. Yeah, the kite string, I really love it. It doesn't completely replace sinew, because if you want white lines to be in your shirt where you're going to be tying tighter like a Ron Star, then the sinew has its place. For me, the kite string has really just replaced the rubber bands. It's rare that I use rubber bands now. I still use them when I go in and do tie-dye in schools with the kids, because I'm doing just the basic patterns, and it's easier when you're working with 200 or 300 kids to be able to get them tied up quickly, so the rubber bands work for that. The dyes I use, they are Dharma mostly. I have bought a little bit from Custom Colors and Grateful Dyes, but for the last 19 years I've been buying from Dharma, and so that's just been my choice. I'm on the West Coast, so shipping to me is fairly decent. I mean, shipping has just gotten expensive, but it just makes it cheaper. Okay, so now I'm going to dye the inside of the cube with turquoise here. Let's see. Let's see. Yeah, I've done that, like with my Sorry, let me read the question. Can you use thick black dye to make an outline of a design and then fill in with regular black to make the design more crisp? Yes, the thick black is going to help give you that nice edge, and then the regular dye you can fill in with that. Sometimes I might put 2 rows, like if I want to dye something solid, I would put another row of the thick black dye before I started with the regular. And I'd always leave a gap. So I would leave a white gap between my thick black dye and the regular dye, and just let that kind of spread some on its own. It's when you try to put your dye immediately up to the line that it might start wanting to spread through there. So that's just one of the techniques for laying dye. I do have another video on laying dye where I demonstrate using orange and purple together. So that's just one of the things to practice on, to get your dyes so that they're not blending as much. So I will leave just a little bit of a white line on my initial passover, just so that the dye doesn't want to spread all the way out, and then I'll come back to that after the dye has spread as much as it's going to, and I'll fill that in. And let's see, we're going to go with green right here next to it. Let's wipe that up little bit. So once again, leaving that white space, that just helps the colors not run together as much. You're still going to have some of that, but I'll leave that and come back to it in a bit. So now what I'm going to do is dye my spiral here. I've only done just a little bit of ice dyeing. It's something that I play with now and then. I've seen some fantastic dyes out there, but I haven't practiced enough to get really good at the ice dyeing. But the ice dyeing does offer some more texture in there. I'll layer colors when I'm doing liquid, but when you're doing the ice dye, you're going to get the colors that separate and give you some nice texture in there. So ice dyeing is definitely something fun to play with, and it is something that you have to take some time to master it. So let's see, we're going to go with some sapphire blue. So I'm just going to make kind of a funky spiral around here. And then I will post this result over on my Facebook page, and I'll put a link to it in the description box so that you can see how this one turned out. The cube part will be pretty much the same as the one that I showed you, the brown and green one, but this spiral part will be a little bit different, so you can kind of see how that affects the t-shirt. Okay, we're getting close. I'll be touching this up soon here, as soon as I finish dyeing the rest of this. Let's put a little bit of yellow just for a little bit of pop in here. I used all these bigger bottles. These are all ones that I got from Dharma many years ago, and they're just standard ones. If I'm doing the smaller detail work, I'm using these ones with these little smaller metal tips on them, and that just allows me to put a finer line. Also, when I tip it up, just a couple drops comes out on its own there. So it just allows for more control. And I'll put a link to these bottles, but I found them on Amazon. They're a 4-ounce bottle, and they work pretty nicely. But when I'm dyeing larger areas, then I like a larger tip to dispense more dye. Because once again, these are 4 ounces, so they're nice, but then if you use it for dyeing your shirt, you're going to have to refill it a couple times, where a 16-ounce bottle is going to last longer. All right. Just about done with this one. So do I have any other questions? I'll try to answer as many questions as I can while I'm finishing dyeing this up here. And then, like I say, I'll let this batch for a couple days, and then I'll have results over on my Facebook page and a link in the description box of this video, along with the other things I mentioned, like my laying color and kite string and thick black dye. I'll put all of the links to all of those down in the description box. Or you asked about a hat video. You mean like dyeing like a baseball hat or something? Or do you mean dyeing actual tie-dyeing a design like a hat? The VW van is a stitched design, and I will be doing a video on that. I have a couple other videos for stitching, but I was planning on doing one more, and the VW van is one of them. But the stitch designs take a long time, and when I'm doing the video, then it takes even longer just getting that, so I need to wait till I have the time to do it. So what I'm doing right here is just kind of touching up right close to the line now, where the dye has spread as much as it's going to. So now I like to add just a little bit more right next to that line. And using one of these small bottles is helpful to allow me to put just a little bit of dye in there. Keep the dye. I let these dyes sit around about 2 to 3 weeks. After that point, I will go ahead and dump them back into a mixing cup and add another scoop of dye just to refresh them. And I will only do that once. And my general room temperature around here is usually somewhere between 65 and 70 degrees. If it gets warmer than that, I'll try to put my dyes either in a cooler, or I'll toss some wet rags over top of them just to try to keep them cool. But if you do have a spare fridge and you put your dyes in there, they'll last much longer than the 2 or 3 weeks. But after 2 or 3 weeks, then it's questionable how dark the colors are going to come out. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is just press, since I just added this dye right along this line here, I'm going to just press that in just a little bit, just so that it will saturate down inside. So this just takes a little extra time, but it's going to give you better results by dyeing away from the line, adding that afterwards, and then pressing it down inside. Okay. Yeah, for making the dyes last longer, cooler is definitely better. I think I seen something on Paula Birch's site that says that they would last up to 9 times longer. Yeah, I use the cuticle pusher, mostly because it has a nice flat edge on there. It has one other skinny little edge, but that one's a little pointier, so I don't use it. I use this one here, and it's even wide. I don't know if you can quite see just how wide. But that's been really nice. I haven't made any holes with that in my t-shirts. Let's see. I don't see any more questions. So I think I might wrap this up. Like I say, I'm going to let this sit and batch for 48 hours, and then I'll wash it out and have the results. So thank you all for joining me, and I'll try to get back on and do another live video at some point. Now let's see if we can end this thing. Okay, I think I'm still live.